Welcome to Lesson 2 of Section 3 of the Brewers Anonymous BJCP program. We are continuing the section covering the judging process, and we've got a couple of small subjects wrapped up into one lesson this time. This lesson is covering the judging environment and judging equipment, and most of you are probably going to be saying, yeah, no duh, to most of the information in this lesson, but we are trying to make this as complete of a course as possible, and that includes covering everything on the exam that's in the study guide, and this fits that description. So this is technically 2 subjects and one following the exam study guide, but they're both very short, and the likelihood of having to review either of these subjects separately are pretty slim. So I'm going to roll the dice and do these 2 subjects as one. And we're going to start with the judging environment. Before I start, I'm going to make one note here about environment. I am talking about the perfect scenario for an environment. You will find in real life judging sessions, very few, if any, of these details are going to match these conditions. Even with the best efforts, not many locations are going to be able to match this ideal perfect environment. And that's perfectly fine. The competition still moves forward. This information, as everything else in this course, is information that could show up in your exam. So we're going to cover the environment as it should be, rather than what it usually is. And we're going to start off by talking about lighting. In perfect conditions, everything should be well lit. Natural light, diffused natural light is actually the best, not just natural light. You don't want to be looking directly into the sun, not only while judging, but just in general. And if you're inside, incandescent light is preferred over fluorescent lights. For the immediate surroundings, the walls and tablecloths should be light or preferably white solid colors and no distracting patterns or graphics. It should be an odor-free environment. Smoking and perfume should be eliminated as much as possible. Should also try avoid scented hand lotions and more commonly these days scented hand sanitizers. This is a big challenge for a lot of competitions hosted by homebrew clubs because most of them have kind of a home brewery where they do everything, including their judging sessions for their competitions. And we already know these breweries are brewing beer. A lot of them have kitchens as well. You just have to adjust and do your best with the environment that you have available. However, as I said, when it comes to the exam, these are the conditions you're hoping to find. Now on to judging equipment. And again, I'm going to point out the information in this part of the lesson is for the exam world, not necessarily the real world. Specifically, the exam does not have anything to do with electric score sheets. That is another set of equipment that you will need that is actually going to replace some of the equipment that we would talk about in this lesson. But since that's not covered on the exam, we're not going to discuss that. We're going to discuss the information that could be on the exam. And this time, let's start with mechanical pencils. And along with mechanical pencils, replacement lead and erasers. This was not in the exam study guide. This is from personal experience. Make sure you have those on hand or make sure you have a ton of disposable mechanical pencils available because they do run out eventually if you are doing paper score sheets. No wood pencils, and that is because the shavings, both from the lead and the wood, do interfere with some judges' aroma perceptions. You'll also need sampling cups, plastic or clean glass, and if it's going to be glass, make sure it's odor-free. No soapy aroma or flavor left over from residue, just in general, but definitely not for judging. And you also want some kind of access to the style guidelines. Again, this is for the actual real-world judging situation. You will not have this in your exam situation, but in the real-world situation, you want access to the guidelines in one way or another, be it electronic on phones or tablets, on the computer if you're judging electronically, or printed out if you're doing all paper score sheets, or a combination of all of those above. You'll also want a set of palate cleansers in the form of water and bread or crackers, preferably unsalted crackers if you go with crackers. Something nice and bland to take off the dominant flavors of the last beer you tasted before you go on to the next flight, so you have a nice, clean base palate to start with your next beer. It's actually a really good idea to taste some crackers before the first beer in the flight. That way, every starting point is the same for all beers on there. You want to make sure you have all this on hand for your judges in the perfect environment. And then a bunch of miscellaneous stuff, bottle openers and corkscrews. I have judged not only meads, but I've judged some sours and I think a lambic that came in cork. So corkscrews, having at least one on hand that you can pass around to tables when that one out of every how many beers or meads show up needing a corkscrew on hand. It's going to come up sooner or later. So if you have a box where you're collecting all your gear for, throw one in now. That way it's on hand every time you grab that box. Dump buckets. Again, one in every however many beers is going to have some kind of spillover, be it from infection or overcarbonation, or maybe it got shook up in transit from wherever it was coming from for your table. So have that dump bucket ready so that it spills over into that and not onto you. Towels/paper towels. I guess if it does dump on you, that's one reason to have them. You also might knock a bottle or a cup over, or just the straight condensation from the bottles can start to puddle up and pull on the table or wherever you're setting those beers aside as you're judging them. So have those on hand to kind of clean that up and keep it a little more controlled. Temporary caps are noted in the BJCP Exam Study guideline. I will say, and I think just about every situation I've judged in, we tend to just use the cap that we just took off the bottle. One, it fits on snugly enough and contains it enough for the amount of time we're going to need that beer. And two, it has the identifying label and entry number of that beer on the cap as well, in case we need to refer back to it. And cooler or temporary storage for open bottles. This is a huge thing down here in Florida. Even inside, it is hot and humid, and having those beers on ice if we need to revisit them, or if we need those bottles for mini best of show in that same sitting, keeping them as cold as possible gives them the best chance, or presents them the best way to be judged and rejudged. All right, short lesson here. That's it. Let's move on to the next one.